light green, dark green stripes. Now the grass I might have might be really poor, it might be a really old lawn, but by overseeding this and introducing new cultivars, we're going to be using 100% ryegrass, which stripes really well and it really establishes and germinates to a high percentage. So the method that we're going to use is not going to involve loads of really expensive equipment, but it's going to involve using what's in these bags here as the growing medium, and that's compost. This compost has been bought from a supermarket at £3 a bag, and there's 50 litres in a bag. We've been doing some experiments as part of another trial that we're doing more generally about seeds, and you can catch up with that, the links below. And we've been growing the grass in tubs as first part of the experiment, and we were testing out the different cultivars. But what we also did was sow the seed on top of the soil from this garden, and then we put the seed on and then we topped it off with 3 different mediums. And what I've got here is on the top of this box here is we used over the top of the seed compost, and on this section here we used a sand soil mix, predominantly sand, 70% sand and 30% soil. And then on this third of the box we just used the same soil that we used in the base from the garden. And we were really surprised. It was very definitely, when the grass plants start to emerge, it was coming out of where the compost was used. And then as that's carried on, because the grass plants have had a head start, it's thicker already, and this was literally sown 3 weeks ago. So we're starting to get a really great lawn going, and so we were convinced that composting was using compost as a topping over the top of the seed was going to give us a much better result. Then I'll show you something else that we did as part of that development of this technique. So the second part of the trial was we seeded this area. I levelled it first using the sand and soil mixture using a lute, and then once I'd done that, I then mixed the seed with the compost at the seed rate I wanted and covered the whole area. But I did something slightly different with this strip here, which you can see is the width of the compost spreader. I then filled the compost spreader up with just compost, and I deposited another covering of compost over the compost and seed mix that I put down to start off with. And we were really surprised to see, and you can still see very significantly, this is 2 weeks after seeding, that what we've got is an establishment rate, although still a little bit patchy because it's still quite young. We've got an establishment rate here that is much higher than the adjacent runs, which just had seed and compost. You can see even now that there's still seed on the surface here as the compost has broken down, but here there's much less seed and there's much more grass. So that's the method that we're going to use on our little trial over just across the way from the drive. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this compost spreader, which is a really nice spreader. I put the compost inside there, and then when I run that over the ground, it spreads out a reasonably even amount of compost. What I'm also going to do before I put the compost in there is I'm going to put the compost in the wheelbarrow and mix the grass seed up. I've already worked out that this area here is about 50 square meters. I'm going to be using an ideal overseeding rate of about 50 grams per metre. So I'm going to need about 250 grams of grass seed in order to sow this area, which I'll mix in with the top dressing. I'll then distribute it, and once I've done all of that, I'm then going to use just plain compost material, and I'm going to go over the top of that again. What I did before I started was I've irrigated this really well, so the ground is now really moist, because I didn't want any deficit in moisture to occur when I topped it off then with the compost. So let's get on with it. So that's the first stage done. The compost and the seed mix is now spread around. Now, one of the things I found with the compost spreader, you have these areas of steel and not mesh, and it does leave these strips here where there's no compost and therefore no seed. So the other